Thank you for downloading this podcast from The Reedy Clubby Show on Talk Radio 702 and 567 Cape Talk. For more, please go to 702.co.za or capetalk.co.za. The Naked Scientist on Talk Radio 702 and 567 Cape Talk with Reedy Clubby.
Chris, good morning. Lovely to chat to you. Welcome.
Good morning.
I can't get over this. Urine and cell phones. I didn't know that there was some connection. Scientists unveiling the world's first mobile phone powered by urine?
Well, what they've done, this is a group in Bristol University in Britain. They've created this box. It's about the size of a big box that you would put milk bottles in, a milk crate. And you have a wire coming off of it, and it generates current sufficiently large to charge a mobile phone. And what people don't know is that inside this box is a seething mass of bacteria, and these bacteria can metabolize the chemicals that are in urine and produce electricity. So it's a sort of proof of concept, P-power. And you basically are demonstrating that you can use microbes to turn a waste product that would normally be thrown away into something useful. The amount of electricity is very small, but it is demonstrating that you can actually extract electrochemical energy from waste. And the idea is that perhaps you could have a mobile, charge your phone mobile system all over the place, and people just go to the loo, and then out comes some power. I heard one other person speculating that you might make these things as a sort of personal portable electricity carry pack. So you'd carry around this sort of desiccated system, and then you pee in it, and then a little while later, after it's warmed up in your pocket, it's pumping out some current and you can charge things up with it. One person who this was put to said, well, what happens if someone runs into you when you're carrying it around in your pocket? That could be a bit disgusting, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, our lines are open for you on 021 446 0567 011 883 0702. I was on your Twitter account or your Twitter page, Chris, and I saw some very oh no, they've just disappeared. I'll find the question that fascinated me in just a moment. But there's an SMS here from Rosie. It says, please could you ask Chris why, if the sun is this big ball of fire and creates light, how come it is dark in space?
Right, well, first of all, you have to ask, well, why are things light in the first place? And things are light either because they give out light or because they reflect light. The sun is giving out light. It's a giant nuclear reactor, and it's converting mass into energy and radiating that energy off into space. And when it hits something, it bounces off of it, and we can see it. So when you look at the planets in our solar system, things like Jupiter, things like Saturn, the Earth, they all reflect light off of their atmospheres, and a person observing from outside in space sees this pinpoint of light, which is the light reflecting off those planets. But space itself is empty. There's only a few atoms in every cubic metre of space, if that. And so there's nothing for the light to interact with and bounce from, so space looks dark, and it is dark. It's very cold. If you go out from our solar system, it's, close to absolute zero out there.
Here's the question that I wanted to ask you. I saw it posted on your Twitter page. What you eat could affect how your gut breaks down drugs. Chris, I'm very fascinated by that.
There's a study. It's actually come out this week. It's by researchers in America. It's a gentleman called Henry Hazer, who's at Harvard. It's in Science this week. And they were looking at this whole question of, we give people around the world different drugs, and different drugs work differently in different people. And you might say, well, that's just because we're all different. We're biochemically a little bit different. But then they do these interesting studies where they find that in mice, if they take mice and they put a certain bug into them, a bacterium, which is commonly found in the intestine, this bug can break down a certain drug that we usually use for heart conditions. And they found that if they feed the mice a diet which is very rich in protein, then these bugs lose interest in breaking down the drug, and they change their metabolism and break down other things instead. Whereas if you feed a low-protein diet, then the mice massively increase their breakdown of the drug molecule. So when you take blood out of the mice, you find that the levels can vary by 100%. And of course, that could make the difference between a drug working or not working. And so they're making the point that in future, when we give people drugs, we should also be considering maybe measuring what sorts of bugs they have in their intestines and what sort of diet they're eating, because this could be affecting the way these drugs work. And we may need to tweak the system a bit, either tweak their diet or tweak the dose of the drug in order to achieve the therapeutic effect that we desire.
Thank you very much, Chris. Let's go straight to the lines then. We have Martin joining us from Germiston. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris. I read somewhere, if you fill a plastic bag halfway with water and you throw in a few pennies or coins and you hang this bag near an open window, be it a restaurant or pub or something, no flies actually enters the restaurant or that area where the bag is. Is there any truth to it, and does it work, and how does it work?
Okay, coins and water
Well,
is
Martin,
a deterrent.
I think you should do the test, because science
Yes.
is all about doing the right experiment. So you need to do the experiment and do a controlled experiment. So you need to have a bag with and without water, a bag with and without coins, a window with and without a bag, and you need to do this lots of times and count the number of flies in the restaurant, keeping the restaurant invariant for a while, and then go to a series of restaurants and try this at different times of the year and see if you can build up a relationship, and not with the restaurant owner, but with the number of flies going in, and then report back here and tell us what you find. My own feeling is it probably won't work.
I suspect it won't work either. So I didn't want to say it first, so you did. Martin, good luck to you. Try that experiment and get back to us. We really want to know what the outcome is. Janet in Newlands, stay on the line for me. I'll take your call in a moment. Our lines are open for you. Do call us. What are your questions for The Naked Scientist? We're satisfying our curiosity about the world in which we live on 021 446 0567 011 883 0702.
The Naked Scientist on Talk Radio 702 and 567 Cape Talk with Rudy Clappy.
19 minutes to 10 o'clock. Let's go straight to Janet in Newlands. Hi.
Good morning, Rudy. Good morning, Chris. I've got two elderly black and white cats, mother and son. She's 19, he's 18. There is not a sign of grey in their fur. I'm amazed. What's the explanation to this?
Hi, Janet.
Cats don't go grey. People do.
I won't suggest that you're going grey at all. I'm sure not. But maybe the cats just use hair dye. Have you thought of that?
Chris.
No, just kidding. It's a very good question. And I think that the point here is how old they are, because in a human, it takes a good 30, 40, 50 years before you begin to go grey. Whereas in a cat, now, yes, they do live less long than us, but that doesn't mean that all of their tissues are ageing at the same rate. And I think in the same way that a cat ages more slowly in its fur situation, so it retains its colouring and markings, internally it's going to age more quickly, which is why cats do tend to get kidney problems and heart problems as they get a bit older, and then they tend to live not more than 20 years. Humans go on for 4 times that. So I think it's probably down to the fact that not all the tissues in the cat age at the same sort of rate, and just because a cat doesn't live for as long as a human does, it doesn't mean that all of its tissues clap out at the same rate universally through the cat. So I suspect that the cells that add the pigment to the hair are maintaining their activity for longer in the cat because they're only doing it for 20 years, and cats have lots of them because cats have very colourful fur, and that's the reason. But I will look into that because it's an interesting question, and I think there might be more to it than I'm able to come up with here. So thank you for that, Janet.
Thanks, Janet. We'll have an answer hopefully soon. Paul in Cape Town. Hi.
Hi, morning, Rudy. Good morning, Chris. My question is, what is the most accurate? Is it going to be by GPS as far as testing the speed goes, GPS or my odometer? Which one do I trust the most?
Hi, Paul. If you are going at an average, well, let me start again. If you are travelling at a constant speed along a nice flat bit of road and you have good line of sight to these satellites, the GPS is going to return a very, very accurate average speed. If you look at the odometer in your car, this is inaccurate anyway, because as the tyres wear down, then the wheel speed changes very slightly, so there's a degree of inaccuracy, because it's recording how many times the wheel goes round on the car. And if you've got new tread, then obviously the circumference of the tyre is slightly bigger than if you have older tyres which have worn down, because the tread has gone, therefore the tyre is slightly smaller. So this will also make you have an inaccurate speed. Also, the odometer is calibrated, but there will be a tolerance. Most of them may be up to 10% out, and that tolerance may become greater the faster you're going or the slower you're going, depends. So therefore, at a constant speed, I would go with the GPS. If you're at very slow speeds or stopping and starting, GPSs are notoriously unreliable because there's a lot of wiggle, there's inaccuracies, and so it will make mistakes at very low speeds and that sort of thing, and when it doesn't have constant line of sight. So therefore, under those circumstances, the odometer would be a better way of recording what's going on. So it depends on the situation.
Thanks very much, Paul. And let's go to, is it another Paul in Brixton? Good morning.
Good morning. I have a question relating to the Messinian salinity crisis, which happened about 5.5 million years ago when the Mediterranean basin repeatedly closed and opened due to tectonic movement, during which time it would have dried out within 1,000 years and then refilled within a year when it did reopen. Now, the question is, how would that have affected sea life, like reefs? How would that have affected the climate and, by extension, evolution?
Okay. A lot of questions there. I think the thing is that across the whole of the planet, the Mediterranean is just one very tiny place. So on the grand scheme of things, it would have made very little difference to the whole planet, as indeed it hasn't. At a local level, it would have had a dramatic effect, obviously, for the organisms that are there. And so some organisms probably wouldn't have been able to tolerate the changes as they began to occur. Other organisms would have been able to adapt, and some would have just been completely killed outright straight away. It's interesting because if you go to northwestern Australia, there's a place called the Perrin Peninsula, Perrin Bay, and within that is Shark Bay. And this is a very big enclosed bit of sea. So there are these two almost like pincers of a crab that go out into the ocean, the Indian Ocean. And there's a narrow inlet, and then there's a big body of water within this area. And because it's sort of similar to the Mediterranean, you get a lot of evaporation off of the water, so the salinity there is much higher. And if you look at the sorts of species that live there, there are shellfish which are tolerant of much more salty water than you would find elsewhere. And there are other species like that too. So this strongly suggests that these sorts of animals do exist and can evolve to exist, and I suspect that this sort of thing would have happened in the Mediterranean progressively as salinity has gone up and down over time. So it will slowly, these things don't happen overnight usually, so as a result you've got time for animals to shift, move or adapt, and there will be animals that will have adapted along that timeline to become tolerant of those conditions, I would say.
Phil, Douglasdale.
Good morning to you guys.
Yes.
My question is a medical question, a quick one. When you have various aches and pains in your body, sometimes you're told to put a hot pack on it, and sometimes you're told to put an ice pack on it. Now, my question is, when do you use which and why? I'll listen on the radio. Thank you.
Yes,
I
a
also
lovely
want
question.
to know.
Well, we did actually look at this on the Naked Scientists podcast a while back, sort of, does ice really make a difference to injuries? And the jury's out, really. When you have got injury, you want blood flow to the area to bring in nutrients and restorative factors so that it can repair itself. The problem is that when you have an intense blood flow and a lot of inflammation, it's very sore. So if you want to slow down the sorts of chemical reactions that make inflammation, and you want to bring swelling down, then putting a cold compress on something has the effect of slowing down the chemical reactions a little bit, so you make fewer inflammatory mediators, but also it causes the blood vessels to constrict a bit, and this means that there's less blood flowing into the area, therefore it doesn't swell so much. So it really depends. It's sort of horses for courses. It depends on what's wanted to be achieved. If you want to put something warm on an area, get the blood flowing to it and get it repaired, that's a good thing. If you want to slow down the rate at which inflammation is occurring, to stop it swelling up and becoming painful, then sometimes a cold compress is good too. I don't think there's any really, really good clinical data out there, one over the other, of which is the best to do. I will have a look at this, because it is a good question, and see if I can find anybody who's actually done a trial. It's really hard to do it well, though, because if you say you bruise yourself, you're not going to have an identical bruise on your right leg and on your left leg and then be able to put a cold compress on one and a hot pad on the other to compare. So it's really difficult to do these sorts of studies and do them well, but I will certainly have a look into this and see what I can flush out, because it is interesting.
Here's an SMS here. I was on a diabetic diet when I was pregnant with my 3 kids, says Karen, and I always went back to my weight. My kids are now small eaters and maintain their weight well. Could this have been a result of my diabetic diet during pregnancy?
Well, there's certainly a suggestion that your babies do inherit their what's called epigenetic profile, in other words, how their DNA works, based on what mum eats when she is pregnant. And the data on this is largely based on people who have had very dramatic things happen to them when they've been pregnant. There's a very good study which was published a few years ago by a gentleman called Bas Heijmans, who works in the Netherlands, and he was studying people who were part of the Dutch hunger winter. During the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands in World War II, very large numbers of people ended up starving, and some of those people, just by chance, were pregnant at the time, so the babies that they were carrying were effectively being starved as well, because mum was hungry. What they have been able to do in the subsequent studies is to compare those babies that were born to the women who were starving with their brothers and sisters who were born at the time when their mum was well fed, and they therefore share a very large number of genes in common because they're all in the same family. What's different for them is whether or not mum was well fed during pregnancy. Those babies that were born to those mums who were starved have a much higher risk than their brothers and sisters of developing high blood pressure, stroke, heart disease, diabetes and obesity. And when they've looked at some of the genes in these individuals, they find that they have a different epigenetic profile. In other words, there are switches that can be added onto genes in the form of a chemical tag which can control how active certain genes are. And these individuals with these disease risks, whose mums were starving, have different epigenetic tags added to their DNA compared to their brothers and sisters. This shows us that what mum eats when she's pregnant has a very dramatic impact on the health outcomes for her babies and potentially also her baby's babies, because if she gives birth to a daughter, then the baby that's inside a pregnant woman, if it's a girl, even while it's a little baby developing inside the mother, already the eggs that are going to be that girl's future babies are developing there. So you can in fact impact on all of those generations. It's rather like a Russian doll with one doll inside the other. And so I would argue that in the case of the diabetic example we've just heard, it's certainly true that the mother's health during her pregnancy is going to have a lifelong impact on the outcome for her baby. Whether this will affect their urge to eat or not, that's probably something slightly different. But their ability to control their weight and have good control over blood pressure and disease risk subsequently, that's absolutely going to be affected.
You've just depressed me, Chris. I'm shattered. Completely destroyed, because with me it was the other way around. I was a health eater before I fell pregnant, and I don't know what's been happening the last 7 months, but it's been disastrous, if I may say.
So are you saying you're eating a lot?
No, it's not the quantity. It's the kind of food I find I can handle. I'm eating carbs. I can't handle vegetables. I can't stand fish and chicken, all the things that I always ate. I like sweets now, bread, hot crisp buns, things that I never even looked at when I wasn't pregnant.
That's called normal, isn't it?
Oh, for 7 months.
I tell you, my wife said that, I said to her, when our daughter is born, what are you going to have? Because there are certain things that not advised to have when you're pregnant.
Sure.
Things like unpasteurised milk products in sort of soft cheese and things like that. Obviously booze and liver, because liver contains a lot of vitamin A, and this can have a teratogenic, a tissue transforming effect in developing babies. And she said, the first thing I'm going to do is have liver and onions, and I'm going to go and buy some Stilton cheese and or some brie or something, and a big glass of wine. And she did all three the minute she got home from hospital. So it does make a difference, doesn't it? I mean, you have to just go with the flow, reading.
Yes. Okay, let's hope for the best. I also have plans for some champagne and stuff afterwards. Let's go to Mike in Randburg. Hi.
Hi there, folks. Chris, I seem to remember a long time ago hearing somebody say that it's advisable when you run your tap first thing in the morning for a glass of water, you should let it run for a while. Is that true? And if there is some hazard in taking a glass of water out of a tap immediately, what's the health risk?
Hello, Mike. I think this is a legacy more of the old lead pipe days. Because when people who lived in chiefly soft water areas, because if you have hard water, then most of the pipes get furred up with a layer of calcium that stops the water having contact with the pipes anyway. But if you had, say, a lead pipe and soft water which is mildly acidic, then you can end up with the lead leaching into the water and other chemicals from the pipe leaching into the water. So the water which is standing in the pipe can end up with an increased or augmented concentration of some of these chemicals. If that's the first sample you draw off, your glass of water is going to have those things at slightly higher levels. It's also possible in poorly treated water, perhaps that the water was at a high temperature during the day and some bacteria grew in there as well, that kind of thing. So it has two purposes. One is to flush out chemicals that might have leached out of the pipework. This is assuming your house pipework is worse than the water main. And two, if there are bugs in there, if your water's been kept at a warm temperature in your cupboard or something because the pipes run near the hot pipes, then there might be some more bugs, and flushing those out would be a good idea too. Is there evidence for this? Well, you'd have to go by region and look at individual houses and individual streets and look at the plumbing and the age of the plumbing and so on. So it probably isn't a bad idea. It certainly won't do you any harm. It might do you some good.
Righto, Mike. Thank you very much for the call. And Chris, that's where we'll leave it then till next week.
Oh, it's gone so quickly.
It's gone so. I know. It's 10:04. Can you believe it? So we have to wait another 7 days before we speak to you again. But I follow you on Twitter and some of the very interesting questions that come through. Thanks very much, Chris. Chat next week.
Thanks, Reedy. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Ta-ta.
Bye-bye.
And of course, the Twitter handle is @NakedScientists. As simple as that, @NakedScientists, and you can see what other people from different parts of the world, especially those who are listening to the BBC, are asking the Naked Scientist. And you can go onto their website as well on www.thenakedscientists.com. I think it's .co.za. I'm not sure. I'll just verify. Oh, there it is. www.thenakedscientists.com. And you can visit their website. It's still the most downloaded science podcast, and get wiser and get your questions answered. I did say earlier that there's a study that's showing a link between your personality and what you eat. We don't have enough information on that one, so we'll park that question, and then hopefully next week or in future shows be able to answer those questions. You can go onto our website as well on 702 and Cape Talk. It is always there, thoroughly checked, complete. If you're downloading it according to the instructions, you just go onto our website, and then there's a podcast page there. It's not Heard on Air. Heard on Air is information about who was on the show and stuff like that. But you go onto the podcast page and you will see a list of all the podcasts that are there.